In the front bedroom of a London townhouse, a little boy stood on a carpet thick enough to swallow the sound of his shoes. His nurse had already brushed his hair until it lay smooth against his head. His collar had been fastened under his chin, white and stiff, the small points pressing gently against the softness of his neck. His shirt had been laid out that morning as if it were something sacred. No yellowing at the cuffs, no gray shadow near the seams, no trace of sweat, ink, dust, soup, soot, or the nursery fire that had smoked the room the evening before. Downstairs, his mother might receive visitors. His father might step into a carriage. A maid might carry tea through a hallway bright with polished brass. Everything in that house had to appear orderly, because order was not just a comfort in Victorian life. It was a language. Clean linen said money. Clean collars said discipline. Clean sheets said domestic virtue. Clean napkins said the household knew its place in the world. And somewhere else, not far away in miles, but distant in every protection that mattered, a woman bent over a wooden tub with her arms red to the elbow. The room around her was damp before the day had properly begun. Steam clung to the ceiling, water crawled down the walls. A baby shawl hung near the fire, not because it was decorative, but because there was nowhere else to dry it. On the table lay a bundle of shirts, drawers, collars, cuffs, handkerchiefs, and bed linen from a house whose front steps she might never be allowed to enter except by the tradesman's door. The bundle smelled faintly of another life. Lavender from a drawer, tobacco from a gentleman's coat nearby, milk from a nursery cloth, a trace of perfume, a trace of illness, the marks of people who could afford to have their dirt carried away. She loosened the string and separated the pieces by habit. Fine linen here, coarser cotton there, starched collars aside, stained things to be treated harder. There was soap, but soap was not enough. There was soda, sometimes harsh enough to bite the skin. There were bleaching agents, bluing powders, starches, boiling water, irons heavy enough to ache through the wrist, and air so wet and hot that breathing itself became work. The boy in the townhouse would never know her name. He would only know that his shirt appeared clean. That was the quiet connection. One child's respectability passed through a poor woman's hands. One household's reputation depended on another household's exhaustion. The rich did not need to see the reddened skin, the cracked knuckles, the coughing, the faintness, the burns, the swollen feet, the damp rooms, the unpaid bills, or the small children waiting near a wash-house fire while their mother cleaned the evidence of better lives. Victorian society loved cleanliness. It praised it in household manuals, sermons, advertisements, and medical advice. It tied clean clothing to morality, femininity, good motherhood, Christian order, and national progress. Yet the world that demanded spotless linen rarely asked what happened to the women who made it spotless. The cruelty was not hidden in a dungeon. It was folded into clean linen, written into household accounts, and spoken of as good management. By the end of this story, the white shirt will not look innocent anymore. The stiff collar, the bright sheet, the polished domestic image of the Victorian home will carry another meaning. Behind the whiteness will be heat. Behind the smoothness will be raw hands. Behind the scent of soap will be chemicals, poverty, and bodies worn down so that other people could appear pure. A laundress did not poison herself because she misunderstood the danger. Often, she understood it better than anyone. She felt it in the sting of her skin, the heaviness in her chest, the trembling after a long day at the tub. But knowledge did not pay rent. Caution did not feed children. Refusal did not keep a family out of the workhouse. The system did not need to hate her. It only needed her to be poor enough to say yes. Cleanliness in Victorian Britain was never only about dirt. It was about rank, morality, discipline, and the visible proof that a household was being properly governed. A respectable family could not control the mud in the street, the smoke in the air, the open drains in poorer districts, or the soot that settled on windowsills after a foggy morning. But it could control the tablecloth. It could control the sheets. It could control the collars that appeared above a gentleman's waistcoat and the cuffs that showed beneath his sleeves. White linen became a kind of social certificate. A man with a clean collar looked punctual, reliable, employable, and decent. A woman with fresh cuffs and spotless under linen appeared modest, orderly, and well cared for. Children dressed in bright pinafores and clean shirts seemed to belong to a household where nothing had slipped into neglect. The poor might own few garments, wash them at night, and wear them damp in the morning. The middle and upper classes could change linen frequently, send it away, and receive it back folded, whitened, and ready to testify on their behalf. Household manuals praised this kind of order. Advice books told women how to manage servants, preserve fabrics, remove stains, air bedding, whiten yellowed linen, and keep the house free from unpleasant smells. Clean clothing was linked to health, but also to character. Dirt suggested laziness. Smell suggested moral failure. A stained cuff could be read almost like a confession. This was the respectable excuse. Families did not usually say they were buying another woman's pain. They said they were maintaining standards. They were protecting children from disease. They were preventing disorder. They were keeping a proper home. A mother who sent laundry out could tell herself she was being efficient. A mistress who demanded perfect whiteness could tell herself she was encouraging good work. A gentleman who expected a fresh shirt each morning could imagine that cleanliness simply appeared as part of civilized life. And in a way, Victorian society encouraged that imagination. Laundry was treated as women's work, and women's work was often treated as natural. The bending, lifting, scrubbing, wringing, sorting, drying, ironing, folding, and carrying were not always counted as skilled labor because they resembled chores performed inside the home. But when those chores were multiplied by dozens of households, repeated for 12 or 14 hours, performed in damp air beside boiling water, and made dependent on caustic powders and hot irons, they became something much harsher than domestic neatness. They became industrial labor disguised as housekeeping. The laundress stood at the meeting point between private respectability and public exhaustion. In wealthy homes, fine linens might be collected by a servant, packed into hampers, recorded in a laundry book, and sent away. The book mattered because linen was valuable. Shirts, sheets, cuffs, pillowcases, napkins, chemises, drawers, baby clothes, and household cloths could be counted, marked, and checked on return. A missing piece could lead to accusation. A scorch mark could mean a deduction. A collar not stiff enough could mean lost custom. The customer's fabric had value. The laundress's health rarely appeared in the account. Advertisements promised quick washing, improved whiteness, superior starch, bright bluing, patent mangles, and cleansing compounds. Shops sold products that suggested modern progress, as if the problem of dirt had been conquered by chemistry and cleverness. Medical writers increasingly connected cleanliness with health, especially after fears of contagion and the growth of public health thinking. Reformers attacked filth in slums, drains, and overcrowded courts. Cleanliness became part of a national language of improvement, but improvement did not arrive evenly. In fine homes, it meant fresh linen in drawers and clean sheets on beds. In wash houses, it meant stronger substances, hotter water, tighter schedules, and higher expectations. The better the linen had to look, the more punishing the work could become. The whiter the shirt, the less visible the worker. This was the quiet irony at the heart of the trade. A society anxious about purity depended on women whose own bodies were pushed into impurity by the process of creating it. Their arms soaked in dirty water, their lungs filled with steam, their skirts stayed wet for hours, their hands cracked open from repeated washing, then entered more water before the cracks could close. They touched soiled bedding, sickroom cloths, nursery linen, sweat-stiff shirts, and stained undergarments. Often without the protections that later generations would consider basic, respectability moved in one direction, risk moved in the other. For employers, sending laundry out could appear merciful. It kept heavy washing away from the drawing room, the nursery, and sometimes from indoor servants already burdened with cooking, cleaning, and childcare. For married women in poorer neighborhoods, taking in washing could appear preferable to factory work, domestic service, or the workhouse. It could be done near home. It allowed a mother, at least in theory, to remain close to her children. It required no formal education. It could be started with a tub, a fire, water, soap, and willingness. That word, willingness, hid nearly everything. A woman might be willing because her husband's wages were irregular. She might be willing because he was dead, ill, absent, injured, drunk, or underemployed. She might be willing because rent was due on Saturday. She might be willing because bread, coal, and candles had to be bought before any moral theory could matter. She might be willing because parish relief came with humiliation and the workhouse carried dread. She might be willing because a bundle of dirty linen, however dangerous, was still an offer of money. Society could then call it honest work and feel satisfied. There was no need for a villain standing over her shoulder. The pressure had already been built into the price of rent, the cost of food, the fear of shame, the softness of rich linen, the strictness of laundry books, and the belief that a proper woman should be clean, industrious, silent, and grateful for employment. The household called it service. The accounts called it washing. The advertisements called it improvement. Her body knew it as heat, sting, fatigue, and a kind of slow surrender that could be praised from a distance because the distance was the point. Her name might have been Mary, Ellen, Sarah, or Jane. In the records, if she appeared at all, she was more likely to be described by occupation than by life. Laundress, washerwoman, widow, wife of a laborer, applicant for relief, tenant in arrears, mother of 3. Sometimes the handwriting gave her age. Sometimes it gave her parish. Sometimes it gave nothing except the fact that she had asked for help and had been judged according to need, character, and usefulness. She did not begin as a symbol. She began as a girl who learned early that water was heavy. Perhaps she had grown up in a narrow court behind a busier street, where the houses leaned close enough to trap smells between them. Coal smoke, damp brick, fried fish, horse manure, cabbage water. The sharp sourness of overcrowded rooms where too many bodies slept and too few windows opened. Her mother might have taken in washing before her. Her hands might have been the first lesson, red and rough, moving through tubs while children carried pails, shook out garments, returned small pieces near the fire. Schooling, if she had any, came between errands. A poor girl could be useful long before she could be educated. She could mind a baby, fetch water, scrub steps, carry bundles, help with mangling, pick up coal fallen from carts, queue for cheap food, or run to a pawn shop with a folded coat. She learned the geography of survival by walking it. Which shopkeeper gave short credit? Which landlord waited a day? Which streets were safer after dark? Which houses paid late? Which mistress complained but paid? Which ones complained and did not? By the time she was grown, her choices had already narrowed around her. Domestic service was one path, but it often meant living under another roof, obeying bells, losing much of one's time, and leaving children behind if she was married or widowed. Factory work might bring wages, but also fixed hours, discipline, distance, and dangers of its own. Sewing could be done at home, yet paid so poorly in many cases that candlelight and hunger became part of the stitch. Street selling required goods, permission, weather, and luck. Parish relief could save a family from immediate starvation, but it came wrapped in suspicion. The workhouse stood behind every poor woman's calculations like a door she hoped never to open. Laundry offered something that looked like independence. A woman could take bundles into her own room. She could work near her children. She could accept more when rent pressed hard, and less when sickness made standing impossible. She could be known in the neighborhood as respectable, hardworking, useful. She could say with some pride that she earned her bread honestly. But honest work did not mean safe work. It did not mean fair work. It did not mean work chosen freely. The first time she went to ask for washing from a better household, she may have stood at the back entrance, not the front. Her shawl would have been clean if she could manage it, because a laundress selling cleanliness had to wear proof of it on her own body. Her boots might have been worn thin, her dress might have been patched under the arms, the repairs hidden as best as possible. If she had a child with her, the child would be told to stand still, not stare, not touch anything. A servant might open the door and look her over. That look mattered. It measured more than skill. It measured smell, speech, age, reputation, marital status, visible poverty, and whether she seemed likely to steal, delay, damage, or gossip. The mistress of the house might not appear. The housekeeper might speak for her. The laundress might be asked where she lived, who had recommended her, whether she had done fine things before, whether she could get stains out without ruining the linen, whether she had a mangle, whether her home was clean, whether she could return the pieces by Tuesday. She would answer carefully, too humble, and she seemed incompetent, too confident, and she seemed impertinent, too poor, and she might be mistrusted, not poor enough, and she might be offered less pity but no better pay. She had to present herself as needy enough to accept the terms, respectable enough to enter the household's orbit, strong enough to do the work, and invisible enough not to trouble anyone's conscience. Then came the counting: shirts, chemises, collars, cuffs, petticoats, drawers, sheets, towels, pillowcases, nightdresses, napkins, handkerchiefs. Each item might be marked. Each item might be written down. Fine households often kept laundry lists because linen represented money. The laundress's body was not listed, but every piece she carried would become a demand upon it. A bundle of wet linen could weigh far more than it looked. Dry linen was only the beginning. Once soaked, boiled, rinsed, wrung, and lifted, it became a drag against the arms and back. If she carried the work home herself, the bundle might press into her hip, her shoulder, or the crook of her arm until the skin bruised. If she sent a child to help, the child became part of the trade before understanding what was being sold. Payment depended on the arrangement. Some women worked by the piece, some by the bundle, some for regular families, some took whatever came. The rates could be low enough that speed became essential. A woman who worked slowly starved politely. A woman who hurried risked burns, torn cloth, scorched linen, or mistakes that could cost her custom. If a shirt came back yellowed, if a cuff was limp, if a sheet smelled smoky, if a delicate garment was damaged by soda or heat, the complaint traveled faster than the payment. Her reputation could be ruined by one household's displeasure, and the household did not need to understand her circumstances. It did not need to know that the roof leaked near her drying line. It did not need to know that coal had risen in price. It did not need to know that her youngest had a cough, that her husband had been out of work for 10 days, that the landlord had already knocked twice, that she had pawned her better shawl, that the rent collector had written her name in a book with a mark beside it. Poverty turned every ordinary object into pressure. A tub was not just a tub. It was capital. A mangle was not just a machine. It was the difference between taking better work and losing it. Coal was not just fuel. It was time, heat, whiteness, and survival. Soap was not just soap. It was money spent before money was earned. Soda, starch, bluing, lines, pegs, irons, cloths, baskets, and water all stood between her and a few coins that might already be owed. If she lived in a lodging room, the work invaded everything. Steam settled on bedding. Damp crept into walls. Children slept near garments from other people's bodies. Meals were cooked beside tubs. Wet linen hung over chairs, lines, doors, and sometimes above the very place where the family slept. The separation between home and workplace, so carefully preserved in respectable households, collapsed in hers. The rich sent dirt away. She received it into the center of family life. Still, when offered a bundle, she said yes. She said yes because a woman who refused work too often might not be asked again. She said yes because credit depended on appearing industrious. She said yes because hunger made the future smaller. She said yes because the workhouse was always there in imagination, with its uniforms, rules, separated families, and public shame. She said yes because the price of dignity was sometimes paid in skin. No one had to force her hand into the tub. The force had already happened elsewhere, in wages too low to live on, rents too high to miss, widows left without security, mothers judged for poverty, and a society that could praise a poor woman's industry while arranging her life so that industry slowly consumed her. The terrible bargain did not announce itself as terrible. It arrived as a bundle wrapped in cloth, a promise of coins, a request to have everything ready by a certain morning. It arrived through the back door, in a basket carried against the hip, with a list tucked inside and a faint smell of other people's rooms clinging to the linen. To anyone passing in the street, it looked like work, honest work, women's work. The sort of work that kept a poor household respectable enough to avoid pity and useful enough to avoid contempt. But every bundle asked the same question. What part of herself could she spend this week? If she took too little washing, there might not be enough for rent, coal, bread, tea, milk, candles, soap, or the small payments that kept a family from falling openly into distress. If she took too much, her body would become the thing overdrawn. Her wrists would ache before noon. Her back would stiffen. Her eyes would burn from steam. Her skin would split where water and soda had softened it, then roughened it, then opened it. She would sleep in damp air and wake already tired. There was no correct answer, only different kinds of loss. The first loss was often her hands. A laundress's hands were not private things. They belonged to the tub, the brush, the wringer, the flat iron, the line, the customer, the deadline. The skin might begin the week merely red. By Wednesday, it could be cracked. By Friday, the cracks might sting in hot water as if filled with needles. Soda helped loosen grease and dirt, but it did not distinguish between stain and skin. Bleaching substances helped restore whiteness, but whiteness could be bought at the cost of irritation. Burns and sores, starch-stiffened collars, but the repeated dipping, squeezing, and smoothing left fingers tender and swollen. Some women wrapped cloth around their hands when the pain grew sharp. Some rubbed them with grease when they could spare it. Some worked through broken skin because the linen could not wait for healing. A shirt returned late might lose a customer. A hand healed slowly did not feed anyone. Then came the chest, washrooms and poor kitchens filled with damp heat. Boiling water lifted steam into the air until the walls sweated and windows blurred. In winter, the contrast between hot, wet rooms and cold yards could strike the body hard. A woman might carry steaming linen to a line outside, then return to the tub with her dress clinging to her legs. She breathed through soap, smoke, damp cloth, stale human odors, and whatever chemicals were being used to push fabric back toward whiteness. Records from the period often show how working women's illnesses were folded into ordinary language. Cough, weakness, rheumatism, decline, bad chest, fever, exhaustion. The words could be plain. The suffering inside them was not. She had to decide whether to spend money to protect her health or spend her health to earn money. Coal made water hot and irons useful. But coal cost money before the work was paid. Soap cost money. Soda cost money. Bluing cost money. Starch cost money. Clean water could require carrying, waiting, or paying indirectly through rent and access. If she tried to save fuel by shortening boiling time, the linen might not satisfy the customer. If she used less soap, a smell might remain. If she used too much harsh substance, fabric might weaken or her hands might worsen. If she delayed because a child was sick, the household waiting for its linen might not care. The customer wanted purity. The laundress had to calculate how much damage purity required. Her children were part of the bargain too. Taking in washing was sometimes praised because it allowed a mother to remain at home. But home, under this arrangement, was not a protected place. It became a damp workplace filled with tubs, steam, hot irons, scalding water, wet floors, and bundles of cloth that did not belong to the family. A small child might be told to keep away from the copper, from the fire, from the iron cooling on the hearth, from the bucket near the doorway. But children in poor rooms lived close to danger because there was no spare room for safety to occupy. A baby might cry while the mother's arms were deep in water. A toddler might tug at her skirt while she counted collars. An older child might miss school to carry a basket, fetch water, watch the younger ones, or turn garments near the heat. Reformers sometimes spoke of poor mothers neglecting their children, but neglect was a cruel word for a woman trapped between two duties with one body. If she stopped working to comfort the child, the washing slowed. If she ignored the child, something human in her was made to harden for the sake of survival. The money was real. So was the thing it could never buy back. Food became another calculation. Laundry work demanded strength, but poverty offered thin nourishment. Bread, dripping, tea, potatoes, cheap fish, scraps when available, perhaps a little bacon on better days. A woman standing over tubs for hours might eat quickly, badly, or not enough. Tea could quiet hunger for a while. Bread could fill the stomach without restoring the body. The work used heat, muscle, breath, and patience faster than poor meals could replace them. She could not easily choose rest. Rest was expensive. Rest meant the bundle sat unfinished. Rest meant the customer waited. Rest meant less money, and less money meant the pawning of a shawl, a blanket, a tool, a Sunday dress, or a child's boots. Rest might mean asking for parish relief where need was examined like a fault. Rest might mean admitting weakness in a neighborhood where reputation mattered because credit depended on it. A poor woman's respectability had to be performed even when her body was failing. She could not easily choose medicine. A doctor cost money. Medicine cost money. Time away from work cost money. Some charitable dispensaries existed, and some women sought help where they could. But treatment often came after endurance had already done its damage. A sore could become infected. A cough could linger. A burn could stiffen. Swollen joints could make ringing difficult. Pain could become part of the workday, so familiar that it no longer counted as an emergency. And she could not easily choose safer work. Safer work, when it existed, might pay less. Demand references she did not have, require hours she could not keep, or remove her from the children she was already failing to protect. Domestic service might feed a young unmarried woman, but it did not welcome a mother with dependents. Factory work might offer steadier wages, but could bring its own machinery, rules, fines, and exhaustion. Needlework could be taken home, but in many cases paid so little that the eyes, lungs, and stomach were sacrificed in another manner. Street work exposed a woman to weather, police, insult, and uncertainty, so she remained with the tub. This was why the arrangement endured. It did not offer a good choice. It offered a bad choice that looked slightly better than the others. It allowed society to say she was independent while giving her no real independence. It allowed customers to praise her industry while paying just enough to keep her returning. It allowed reformers to admire domestic labor while missing the fact that her domestic space had been invaded by the dirt and expectations of wealthier homes. There was also shame, and shame was useful to the system. A laundress who complained too loudly risked being seen as difficult. A woman who failed to keep up might be called idle. A woman whose room smelled damp might be judged unclean, though the damp came partly from the work she was paid to do. A woman whose children looked neglected might be blamed, though her hours had been consumed by other families' linen. A woman whose hands were raw might be pitied for a moment, then handed another basket. Victorian moral language often turned suffering into character assessment. The orderly poor deserved help. The disorderly poor deserved correction. But laundry work could create the very disorder for which poor women were condemned. Damp rooms, tired children, sickness, late payments, pawned clothing, missed schooling, and a mother too exhausted to keep everything neat could all be read as personal failure instead of the residue of work. That was the deeper poisoning. The soda burned her skin. The steam burdened her chest. The heat drained her strength, but the moral poison taught her to see her own exhaustion as inadequacy. If she could not keep the room dry, she had failed. If she could not remain gentle with the children, she had failed. If she could not return the linen spotless, she had failed. If she could not earn enough, she had failed. If she became ill, she had failed at being useful. The household sent away dirty linen and received back cleanliness. She took in dirty linen and absorbed judgment. The impossible trade-off was not simply health for wages. It was dignity for survival, motherhood for respectability, bodily safety for the appearance of independence. Each coin she earned carried relief, but also a small accusation. It proved she was working. It also proved she had to keep working, no matter what the work was doing to her. At night, when the irons cooled and the last damp cloth was shifted nearer the fire, she might look at her hands and understand the bargain without needing anyone to explain it. There would be money, perhaps enough for bread, perhaps enough to quiet the landlord for a few more days. There would be linen ready for someone else's drawer, someone else's table, someone else's clean morning, and there would be the smell of soap still trapped in her skin, sharp and bitter, as if cleanliness itself had learned how to wound. The day began before the linen did. In many poor rooms, morning did not arrive gently. It came as a calculation in the dark. How much coal remained, how much soap could be shaved without making the water too weak, whether the child's cough sounded worse, whether the weather would allow drying, whether the rent collector might come before the washing was paid for, whether the body could be persuaded to rise before it had truly recovered from the day before. A laundress did not step into work. She woke inside it. The bundle might already be waiting in the corner, tied with string, giving off a smell that seemed faint at first and then grew stronger once the cloth was opened. There were shirts stiff with sweat at the collar, cuffs darkened by city soot, napkins carrying grease, sheets with the sour odor of sleep, undergarments with marks that had to be treated without comment, nursery cloths from children whose names she did not know, and sometimes bedding from sick rooms that carried fear into the wash without ever naming it. She sorted by touch, color, fabric, and danger. Fine linen could not be handled like coarse cotton. Lace could not be scrubbed like a servant's apron. Wool had its own demands. Starched collars needed attention. Cuffs needed firmness. Handkerchiefs needed whitening. And household napery had to return flat and respectable enough for a table where guests might speak softly about charity. If she mixed the wrong things, the color might run. If she boiled too fiercely, the fabric might weaken. If she scrubbed too hard, she might damage what she could not afford to replace. Skill lived in her hands, even when society refused to name it skill. Water came first, and water was labor before it was useful. In some neighborhoods, it had to be carried, drawn, heated, shifted, and guarded. A full pail dragged at the shoulder. A tub filled slowly. The copper or boiler had to be made ready. Coal had to catch. Smoke had to be coaxed upward. In a cramped space, heat gathered quickly, and the air thickened before the washing had truly begun. Then came soaking. Cloth disappeared into water that changed almost at once. Clear water became gray, then yellowish, then clouded with soap, sweat, dust, and the ordinary secretions of lives more comfortable than hers. She leaned over it, sleeves rolled, bodice dampening at the front, hair loosening at the temples. The first plunge could be cold enough to shock the fingers. Later, the heat could redden the arms until the skin looked scalded, even when it was only overworked. She rubbed and lifted. Rubbed and lifted. The sound of washing was not quiet. It was the slap of cloth against board, the scrape of knuckles near wood, the wet thud of linen dropped into a tub, the hiss of boiling, the cough from smoke, The cry of a child, the clatter of an iron set down too sharply, the creak of a mangle, the drip from lines strung where people also had to live. There was rhythm in it, but not peace. The body kept time because the work demanded timekeeping. Soap alone rarely satisfied Victorian whiteness. Soda might be added to cut grease. Bleaching substances might be used to brighten cloth. Bluing gave the eye a colder whiteness, hiding yellow tones by tinting them faintly toward blue. Starch gave collars and cuffs the firm discipline that gentlemen expected around the throat and wrist. Each substance promised improvement. Each also asked something of the woman who handled it, especially when used often, in poor ventilation, with bare hands, and under pressure to produce results. Her skin became the first surface tested. The water softened it. The soda roughened it. Heat opened it. Cold cracked it. Soap lodged in the cuts. Starch dried against the fingers. By midday, the hands might feel both numb and burning, as if they no longer fully belonged to the person using them. A small sore could become a constant companion, a burn from a splash, a slip against the copper, or a touch of the iron might be wrapped and then ignored, because the shirt could not be told to wait while flesh repaired itself. Wringing was another form of punishment. Wet linen held weight stubbornly. Sheets resisted the arms. Towels twisted thick and heavy. A woman gripped, turned, squeezed, leaned her body into the motion, then did it again. The wrists absorbed the strain. The elbows ached. The shoulders tightened. The back took what the arms could not. A mangle, if she had access to one, helped press out water, but it brought its own labor of turning, feeding, watching, and keeping fingers away from danger. Then came rinsing and more lifting. Water had to be changed because dirty water could not produce the kind of cleanliness demanded by better households. Rinsing meant moving the same cloth through another round of weight and wetness. The floor became slick. The hem of her skirt darkened. Her boots soaked through if they had not already. Damp climbed her stockings. In winter, this damp could stay with her for hours, chilling the legs while steam heated the face. The body was never allowed one climate. It lived in contradictions. Drying depended on weather, space, and luck. On a fine day, lines might be strung outside, where sheets snapped in soot-filled air and every passing chimney threatened the work. In the city, clean linen could be dirtied again by the very atmosphere through which it had to dry. Smoke, fog, dust, and rain were enemies she could not command. A sudden shower meant panic. Linen had to be pulled in quickly, heavy again, half dry, smelling of damp. If there was no yard, garments hung indoors over lines, doors, chairs, racks, and near the fire. The room became a forest of other people's fabric. Children moved carefully beneath shirts and sheets. A kettle might steam beside drying cloth. A baby slept under linen belonging to a stranger. Meals were prepared among garments not yet finished. The air tasted of soap, smoke, wet cotton, starch, and old wood. If the window opened, cold entered. If it stayed shut, damp remained. Walls absorbed the moisture. Bedding absorbed it too. The family did not merely live beside the laundry. They breathed it. After drying came ironing, and ironing demanded a different kind of vigilance. The iron had to be hot enough to smooth and shape, but not hot enough to scorch. Heat was tested with instinct, spit, sound, or quick nearness of the hand. A careless second could mark a garment permanently. A scorch on a gentleman's shirt or a lady's chemise could mean complaint, deduction, or dismissal. The laundress might own several irons, heating one while using another, changing them as they cooled. Each was heavy. Each pass pressed strain into the wrist. The ironing table had its own world of heat. Starch stiffened collars until they held the posture of respectability. Cuffs had to look crisp. Shirt fronts had to lie smooth. Napkins and tablecloths needed straightness. Sheets had to be folded without careless creases. The work required patience at the very hour when patience had been used up. Steam rose from dampened cloth, the face flushed, the back bent. A child might ask for food. A neighbor might knock. A customer might send a message asking whether the bundle would be ready. The answer had to be yes. Surveillance did not always look like someone standing in the room. It could be the laundry list. It could be the expectation of punctual return. It could be the memory of a mistress's complaint. It could be the knowledge that another woman nearby would take the work if she lost it. It could be the silent authority of the household whose name carried more weight than hers. Even alone, she worked under inspection. Humiliation entered through small doors. A customer might sniff returned linen before paying. A housekeeper might unfold a sheet and examine it for damp. A servant might accuse her of losing a handkerchief that had perhaps never been included. A mistress might complain that the collars lacked stiffness, though the price paid barely covered the coal required to finish them. Payment might be delayed with perfect politeness. A deduction might be made for damage. A woman who had labored through heat and pain could stand at a back door while someone counted coins slowly into her hand. The exchange looked ordinary. That was what made it so cruel. No one needed to shout. No one needed to strike her. Respectable society had more delicate methods. It could make her wait. It could doubt her honesty. It could pay late. It could demand better whiteness for the same money. It could treat her as necessary, but not quite welcome. It could allow her to carry the household's most intimate dirt and still consider her too low to enter the clean parts of the house. There was intimacy without recognition. She knew the household through stains. She could tell which shirts belonged to a man who sweated heavily. She could tell which child spilled milk. She could see when illness passed through a bed. She could notice when a garment grew larger for pregnancy, smaller for mourning, finer for guests, rougher for servants. She might know more about the physical truth of a family than many of its visitors did, yet she was not part of their story. She was the hands through which their evidence disappeared. The body kept account more honestly than the laundry book. By afternoon, her back counted the sheets, her wrists counted the wringing, her lungs counted the steam, her eyes counted the smoke, her feet counted the standing, her fingers counted each collar pressed into shape. The customer's list might mark 12 shirts, 6 collars, 4 pairs of cuffs, 2 sheets, 3 towels, and a dozen napkins. Her body marked them differently: 1 burn, 2 new cracks, a deepened cough, a missed meal, a child left too long without comfort. And still, there could be tenderness in her. This is one of the hardest truths. The poor woman at the tub was not made less human by exploitation. She might smooth a child's garment with particular care because it reminded her of her own child. She might remove a stain from a baby's cloth gently, even while resenting the moneyed nursery it came from. She might take pride in a tablecloth whitened properly, in collars finished cleanly, in the skill of work well done. The system used this pride. It depended on her conscience, her standards, her reluctance to send back anything poor, even when poor payment had purchased it. She could care about the work that harmed her. The household could benefit from that care without seeing the contradiction. It could receive folded linen and call her reliable. It could recommend her to another family and feel generous. It could praise her as hardworking, which meant she had learned to hide the cost well enough to remain useful. In this way, praise became another chain. A good laundress endured. A good laundress did not complain. A good laundress returned everything clean, dry, counted, folded, and on time. Evening did not end the work cleanly. Finished linen had to be packed. Pieces had to be checked against the list. Collars stacked, shirts folded, sheets squared, damp corners feared. If anything remained unfinished, sleep retreated. A candle might burn late, spending money while allowing money to be earned. The room cooled, but the damp stayed. Children settled among the smells of soap and drying cloth. The laundress's hands throbbed now that they were no longer moving. Pain often speaks loudest when labor stops. Sometimes she still had her own family's washing to do. That was another quiet cruelty. A woman who spent the day restoring the linen of wealth might have little strength, fuel, soap, or time left for her own. Her children's clothes could remain patched, gray, and worn. Her sheets, if she had more than one set, might be washed less often than those she handled for others. Her dress might smell of the work. Her apron might stiffen with dried soap. Her own home could look disorderly because she had used her orderliness on someone else's home first. If visitors judged her room, they might see dampness, clutter, tired children, a woman with rough hands, an air too heavy to breathe easily. They might not see the polished dining table elsewhere, laid with cloth she had whitened. They might not see the boy fastening a clean collar beneath his chin. They might not see the bed made fresh in a room where sunlight fell softly across a carpet. They might not understand that her disorder and their order were connected by the same bundle. Night settled at last. But not as peace. The copper cooled. The irons darkened. Lines sagged overhead. The floor stayed damp in corners. Her arms felt hollowed out. Her hair smelled of smoke. Her chest felt tight. There might be coins on the table. Not enough for ease, but enough to prove the day had been spent. Tomorrow. The linen would leave her room looking clean enough to hide where it had been. That was the triumph demanded of her. To erase the stain and then erase herself? The arrangement often ended quietly, not with a trial, not with a scandal, not with a household suddenly forced to look at what had been done in its name. It ended with a missed delivery, a complaint, a cough that would not lift, a burn that stiffened the fingers, a baby's illness, a rent debt, a better price offered by another laundress, or one exhausted woman becoming just slightly less useful than the system required. The linen still had to be washed. That was the first cruelty of the ending. The work did not stop because her body did. Shirts continued to soil. Sheets continued to yellow. Collars continued to wilt under the chin. Napkins continued to carry grease from dinners. Nurseries continued to produce stained cloths. Gentlemen still wanted fresh fronts. Ladies still wanted clean underlinen. The household still expected its drawers to be filled and its beds to be made with whiteness. Only the woman could be replaced. If she became too ill to work, the signs might first appear as delay. She might need one more day, then another. She might send a child to apologize at the back door, carrying words carefully rehearsed. Mother is poorly. Mother will have the things ready by morning. Mother asks if you would be kind enough to wait. Kindness had limits when it interfered with clean shirts. A housekeeper might frown over the laundry list. A mistress might decide that unreliability could not be tolerated. A servant might be told to collect the unfinished bundle. Another washerwoman might be found in the same district, perhaps poorer, perhaps younger, perhaps newly widowed, perhaps hungry enough to accept a lower price. The old laundress might be pitied for a moment, but pity rarely washed linen. If she had damaged something, the ending could be sharper. A scorch on a shirt front, a missing handkerchief, a sheet returned damp, a collar not properly starched, a delicate garment roughened by harsh washing. Any of these could become evidence against her. It did not matter that she had worked in bad light, late at night, with cheap fuel, raw hands, and a child crying beside her. The fabric was visible, the circumstances were not. The loss of property could be counted. The loss of health could be discussed vaguely, then dismissed. She might be paid less than expected. She might not be paid at all until the matter was settled. A deduction could be made for damage. A warning could be given. Custom could vanish. For a poor woman, losing regular washing was not a professional inconvenience. It was a crack in the floor. Rent did not pause. Food did not become cheaper. Coal did not arrive out of sympathy. Children still needed boots, bread, and warmth. If she had borrowed against expected payment, the missing coins became a chain pulling her toward the pawn shop. A blanket might go first, then a better dress, then tools, then anything that could be spared. until sparing became another word for surrender. In some cases, illness carried her toward parish relief. There, suffering could become paperwork. A woman who had spent years washing the clothing of respectable households might find herself required to explain her need to officials, guardians, relieving officers, or charitable visitors. She might be asked about her husband, her children, her earnings, her habits, her church attendance, her sobriety, her thrift. Poverty was rarely allowed to stand alone as explanation. It was examined for moral defects. The body that had been useful at the tub was now suspicious because it could no longer earn if she entered a workhouse. The separation could be devastating. Workhouse systems varied, and reforms changed over time, but the fear attached to them was real. Families could be divided by age, sex, and classification. Clothing could be exchanged for institutional dress. The poor person became a case, a body to be managed, for a laundress who had clung to homework because it allowed her to stay near her children. This was one of the deepest threats. The very institution meant to answer destitution could take from her the last thing that made endurance meaningful. Not every ending was so dramatic. Many were smaller, which is why they were easy to ignore. She might continue working, but less. She might accept rougher laundry for poorer pay because fine households no longer trusted her speed. She might pass work to a daughter too young to understand that inheritance can sometimes look like a tub. She might become the older woman in the corner, sorting, folding, or watching an iron while younger arms did the heaviest lifting. She might live with a cough that never became famous enough to be written anywhere. She might disappear into a line in a census, still called laundress long after the work had begun to consume more than it gave. The emotional cost came into view only inside the poor room. A child might remember the smell of damp linen more clearly than the sound of lullabies. A daughter might remember her mother's hands as always sore, always moving, always smelling of soap. A son might remember being sent to collect water, not because he was cruelly treated, but because there was no other way to finish the load. A baby might have slept beneath drying shirts belonging to a boy in a richer house, both children warmed by the same fire, though only one would be dressed in the result. The laundress herself might mourn things that no account book could recognize. She might mourn the softness her hands once had. She might mourn the patience she lost with her children after 12 hours of labor. She might mourn the health she spent in portions too small to notice until the total became frightening. She might mourn the possibility of being known as something more than useful. She might mourn the fact that her work entered other homes transformed into cleanliness, while her own life seemed to return from the exchange more stained, more damp, more tired. The transaction ended cleanly for the customer. The bundle stopped going to one address and began going to another. A different woman's name might be written down. The household adjusted. The shirts still appeared. The beds were still made. The table still shone under lamplight. Guests still lifted napkins without wondering whose hands had prepared them. The small inconvenience of replacement passed quickly because the system had been designed to make workers interchangeable. But for the woman who was replaced, the ending did not pass. It settled. It settled into the joints, where pain remained after work was gone. It settled into debts that outlived the wages that caused them. It settled into children who learned early that their mother's love had always been forced to compete with other people's laundry. It settled into a name half remembered by neighbors, perhaps written once in a parish book, perhaps spoken at a funeral, perhaps lost entirely. There might have been no public moment of recognition, no apology, no household returning the years she had given to their comfort, no gentleman looking at his collar and understanding its true price, no mistress opening a drawer of folded linen and seeing, beneath the whiteness, the woman whose breath and skin had helped create it. The rich child grew. His collars changed size. His shirts became larger. His mother ordered new linen. His father paid accounts. The household continued to display itself as orderly, clean, and respectable. And somewhere in the city, A woman who had helped dress that respectability could become too weak to lift a wet sheet when she could no longer do the work. The work no longer carried her name. Change came, but it did not arrive as justice. It came unevenly, through machines, public health reforms, new businesses, changing household habits, and a slow recognition that laundry was not merely a private chore, but a form of labor capable of injuring the people who performed it. Municipal wash houses appeared in some places, offering access to water, space, and equipment that many poor homes lacked. Commercial laundries expanded. New machines promised speed, pressure, heat, and regularity. Later improvements in sanitation, plumbing, detergents, and factory regulation altered the work again. But progress did not erase the women who had already spent themselves. The language changed more easily than the memory. What had once been taken into poor rooms in baskets could now be sent to larger establishments. What had once steamed through a lodging room might now be processed under a roof built for the purpose. Some women found wages in commercial laundries, though those places could bring their own harsh pace, discipline, heat, and exhaustion. The danger moved shape. It did not simply vanish. Reformers, doctors, inspectors, and social observers increasingly noticed the costs of overcrowded rooms, damp dwellings, dangerous labor, and poor sanitation. They wrote about unhealthy housing, women's work, infant mortality, industrial conditions, and the bodies that carried the weight of respectable society's comfort. Yet even when sympathy appeared, it often arrived late, after years in which poor women had already learned to survive by accepting harm in installments. The laundress belonged to a world that made suffering ordinary. That is why she is so difficult to recover. She did not always leave letters. She did not commission portraits. She did not usually appear in family histories except as a service, a bill, a problem, or an occupation. Her work was meant to disappear into cleanliness. If she succeeded, no one saw her. If she failed, everyone noticed the stain. The wealthy child from the bright bedroom might have grown into a man whose photograph was kept in a frame. His name might have survived in a family Bible, a school record, a marriage announcement, a business directory, or a polished stone in a churchyard. His shirts are gone now, but the world was built to remember him. The woman at the tub may have left almost nothing, perhaps a census line, perhaps a parish note, perhaps a burial entry, perhaps a daughter who inherited the work and carried the memory without writing it down. Perhaps no trace strong enough to resist time. But for a moment, imagine the white shirt again, not as a symbol of innocence, not as proof of moral order, not as the simple brightness of a well-kept home. Imagine it held up to the morning light, clean enough for a child of comfort to wear, clean enough for a mother to approve, clean enough for visitors to admire without thought. Then look closer. In its whiteness is a room filled with steam. In its stiffness is a woman's wrist. In its smoothness is the pressure of an iron. In its faint scent of soap is a cough held back, a burn wrapped in cloth, a child waiting for attention beside a tub of water gone gray. The shirt remembered nothing. That was its purpose. It carried no name, no debt, no apology. It entered the drawer as cleanliness and left the laundress behind as if she had never touched it.